Greetings all, Fireman 601 here. Welcome to the 1960s version of Monza, and welcome aboard the Maserati 250F. This another one of the cars featured in the Assetto Corsa Red Pack released yesterday. And I have to say, it's a peculiar release in the sense that Assetto Corsa really does not feature too many vintage racing machines, although we do have the Lotus 49, another classic Lotus, another two classic Lotus cars actually, plus the 98T from 1986. But this is by far the oldest car that Assetto Corsa has featured thus far, at least officially. Maserati 250F. It comes in two versions. We have a V12 version, which is what we see here. We also have a six-cylinder version, effectively the same engine, just cut in half. But here is what Kunos have given us. It's a very simple car, obviously being as old as it is. You're not going to see the sorts of aerodynamic details that you get in modern machinery, but once again, an incredible job with modeling and textures throughout. This thing is just glorious in all of its detail. Look at the riveting and the bodywork there, the fuel filler cap on top, the exhaust swooping up and out from the rear. Actually, the exhaust, the stays there on the exhaust, just notice this mounted to the top of the rear suspension. Brilliant. Speaking of the rear suspension, you can see on the top there the leaf spring, and then a strut with all the bushings and things. Rear axle, of course. Glorious. See the brake lines going in there to the rear brakes, drum brakes all around on this thing. Disc brakes, yes, they had been invented, but the thought of the time was that drums were still more powerful, even though they get really, really hot really quickly. The front suspension there, you see the strut and spring, tie rod for the steering, the upper and lower A-arms. Wonderful. Front grille with the starter hole for the engine, of course, mounted in the front in these days. The grille work there, the mesh just underneath the Maserati logo, and the cockpit. Wonderful detailing throughout. Glorious. You see a lot of the driver movement actually. And you can see the gear stick actually moves. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely wonderful. So in the cockpit, not a whole lot going on. You've got a steering wheel, oil pressure, tachometer, fuel level, and I think that's fuel pressure. But that's about it. Mirrors, windscreen, and that's it. No electronics, no lights, no buttons, nothing to distract you from driving this car, which is quite a labor-intensive production. Great sound from that V12. We got a 5-speed gearbox. Requisite in the V12 version. The 6-cylinder version has a 4-speed gearbox. But off we go. Great sound from that engine. Now, despite the tires being about the same thickness as wheelbarrow tires, and the brakes being about as effective as putting a set of bottle caps on the wheels, the car still will do over 180 miles an hour. No downforce, no slicks, no nothing, except your own fortitude to keep this thing going in a straight line. Now, I do not profess to be very proficient in any regard of driving these old cars, because the way that you drive them is completely different from the way that you drive even one from the 70s. Here we're talking mid-1950s, of course. You're dealing with what are basically bicycle tires, and the brakes might as well not be there. The way you control these cars is you just kind of suggest to them where you want them to go, and then you let the laws of Newtonian physics sort out the rest. Most of the time when you're going through corners, it is a four-wheel drift, and you make very, very large movements of the steering wheel to make little adjustments as you go. Throttle is a very important element of driving these cars as well. Of course, front engine, but rear-wheel drive. The torque going into the rear axle imparts, yes, you get a propulsive force, but you also get a torsional force through the chassis as the chassis flexes. And that actually goes quite a long way to influencing the car's direction of travel. So you drive these cars with a combination of the steering and throttle to maintain these four-wheel drifts, which from the outside look very dramatic, but on the inside, they're not very unsettling at all. The car wants to drift. And when you see old footage, these cars being driven in anger back in the day, you see them doing exactly that. Throttle all the way through and just letting the car drift. Just playing with the steering and the throttle all the way through. Over 10,000 RPM on an engine that's 60 years old. Is just an overwhelmingly pure, unadulterated driving dynamic. Engine's rated at about 300 horsepower, which doesn't sound like all that much in comparison to the upwards of 1,000 horsepower that this car's modern-day counterparts generate. But when you consider that the thing has no weight at all, and basically the heaviest thing on board is the fuel, no electronics, no KERS batteries to lug around, 300 horsepower is really enough. drifting all the way across the apex, Curva Grande there, and then to the exit. Too much speed through here. Go up onto the berm. But you can see there's no violent break free from the rear end. It just drifts a little bit too wide. The car is very nicely balanced front to rear. The dynamics are excellent. It's just very legato, I guess we would describe it. And you can see there's no rev limiter either, so you get it about up to 10.5 on the engine. You will start to exceed the structural limits of the thing. Not outbrake ourselves again. Just like drifting any other car, you pick your slip angle and then you use the throttle to hold yourself there. But because this thing reacts so gradually to your inputs, you kind of have to be thinking a couple seconds ahead of where you are. Kind of like a conductor. When he's giving his orchestra directions, he's thinking a few measures ahead of where the piece currently is. And we tacked the back end there. Oh, right. You can see you can get a little enthusiastic with things. I just couldn't imagine what this was like, racing these cars back in the 50s. And like I said, 180 plus miles an hour down the straights. No downforce. They didn't even know what downforce was back then. Tires that would be more at home on a Ford Model A than on a Grand Prix car. And you're basically sitting inside a fuel tank. why motor racing was on the cusp of being banned in several countries for being too dangerous. But Assetto Corsa, kudos, they have done an absolutely resplendent job recreating this car, allowing all of us to get a little bit of a taste of what it must have been like to drive these things in anger so long ago. Well, that's the Maserati 250F. Again, if you haven't had a go in it yet, you must. You absolutely must. Even if you're not into these older cars particularly, which is my case, just give it a go. It is a different sort of driving experience, and you'll really appreciate just the fidelity that Kunos has exercised in recreating this thing. It's also a very good demonstration of just how detailed the Assetto Corsa physics model is really becoming, because just the way the thing reacts, steel suspension, springs, all of that kind of stuff, very nicely done. Chassis flex effects as you get on the power mid-corner, just wonderful all the way around. So, thanks for watching.